This is the Convo Lounge. Expression, exposure, experience. Welcome to the second season of the Convo Lounge podcast. My name is Yandile Nuku, and this is a special season where we're going to be focusing on the mining industry as well as the creative industry. And I'm joined in studio by an amazing guest. I'm a big fan, always been a big fan, been following her journey I think for more than 10 years now, joined on set by Marang Selolwane. And Marang, welcome to the Convo Lounge podcast.
I'm so excited. I'm excited because I've been following your work for some time now. And I think you're a brilliant orator and thinker. And I think you have so much to offer that you're already giving to us. And it's so exciting to watch you carve out a space for yourself that I think is untapped, but has so much fruit to bear. Mm-hmm. So I want to see you eat that fruit up because it's yours and it's from God and you do it with so much ease. And that's how you know it's a gift.
Thank you so much. I wasn't expecting that. This is meant to focus on you, but thanks. I mean, I draw a lot of inspiration from people like you. I've seen your journey from obviously when you're a toddler and also a toddler as well. But it's been really great to see how you've transitioned to where you are. And I know we've had this conversation off the record.
Yeah.
We're going to be focusing on the creative economy, but trying to use your life as a case study or your career to learn some insights that we don't usually get on a day-to-day basis. Let's start with this. Let me not define you and talk a little bit about your background. I know you've morphed and emerged into something different now.
Yeah.
A lot has changed. How do you describe Marang Selolwane? What are you up to now?
Marang Selolwane is a multi-hyphenate. Let's start there.
Okay.
She's a founder of Tsatsi, which is an eyewear line. She is a creative economy specialist. She is a seasoned media personality, both traditional and digital media. That's a summary of who Marang Selolwane is in this season.
That sounds like a lot.
But there's harmony.
But exactly.
Yeah.
So, but that's not a conventional. I don't think you were, when you're young, you said, I want to be a creative economy specialist. I want to be, it all just came along.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your spiritual journey and that process. How has it played a role in all of this emergence of the different facets of Marang?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And I think sometimes when we think career, we don't tie it with spirituality. And I think, again, off record, I think we've had multiple conversations on spirituality and how it has to be the backbone of career because a lot of it comes from God. You know, I have found that the things that I've been successful in are closely linked to what I think is my purpose, which is communicating, connecting, and storytelling. It's sharing knowledge. It's sharing what I know. And I believe, and I don't know if it comes across, but when I do it, it feels like I do it with ease. And that's how I'm able to identify the things that I enjoy and the things that I think I'm good at.
Okay.
But through conversations with, various people, they at least do agree that, okay, the specific things that I do with ease, I actually really am good at. And I think that's purpose. I think your purpose really is tied down with what you do with complete comfort. You speak, Yandi. That's why I can say to you, you offer us this gift all the time. And I'm sure there's a lot of prep that goes into it. Yeah. There's a lot of praying that goes into it. And then when it comes down to it, you do it with comfort.
Okay.
And of course, you'll make mistakes in the delivery sometimes. But I think, even those mistakes sometimes are often overlooked. You're just hard on yourself, because there is a bit of, I want to do my best and I want to deliver my purpose at the best possible level. But spirituality has been an enormous part of building the work, I almost said the brand, but I'm also learning to say the business.
Okay.
Because Marang is a business. Marang Selolwane is a business. And I recognize that. And I only started realizing this maybe in the past couple of years with the emergence of digital content creation, and now also having to build systems that facilitate this gift to actually be commercial and generate income for me. So I pray, and I always say this, I pray when I send out a quotation, I pray when I send out an invoice, I pray over my proposals, I pray before meetings, and I always find that what's meant for me comes my way.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's like I'll sit during maybe hangwa house towards the end of the year, and it's usually towards the end of the year, and I write the projects that I want to be engaged in the next year, who I want to work with. It may not be all of them within that year, but it just flows. It's like, oh God, I'll get a call from this person or over lunch at one of the restaurants, it'll be, oh, I saw your work, or hey, let me introduce you to so-and-so. And then there's a campaign that comes out of it, or a speaking engagement, or whatever partnership that comes out of it. So I know that my footsteps are directed by God.
Nice.
Yeah.
I totally relate with that. And I think what I remember is, the saying that says, write your vision down, although it may tarry, it shall come to pass. And I think 7-8 years ago, I had a brand list that I want to work with as Yandide Nuku. And 7-8 years later, that it's actually happening. Yeah. Like you're saying, they come to me, I don't come to them. So I totally relate. So the reason why I asked you about spirituality, and I'm glad you mentioned purpose, is because I see you in a space where you have your own niche, in terms of whether you're an educator, because we're yet to talk about that. You actually didn't mention that. You've taught some students in the creative sector. Yeah.
I've graduated 4 classes.
See, and now you're about to complete your master's, specializing in the creative economy. There has to be something there around, purpose that keeps helping you to be unique in the market. And I know a lot of people don't know what that purpose is, so it's also a blessing to know what your purpose is at an early, stage. My purpose, I think, is to encourage. And I'll tell you how I found out what my purpose is. I don't know how you found out.
Okay.
I was at a bookstore, Nigilgo Exclusive Books, and someone says, oh, can you please help me? She thought I worked at Exclusive Books. It was before I even got into radio. And I said, sorry, I don't work here. I didn't even look at her. She turned. She's like, oh my goodness, what a huge voice in a small body. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Anyway, then I left. And then a few months later, I get to be on radio. I'm told I'm going to start hosting radio, even if people know about the story. Cut the long story short, I then discovered that, I have a voice. There's something about my voice, right? And it's been a spiritual journey to learn that, okay, yes, the voice is like the aesthetics.
Yeah.
But I've got a purpose of encouraging, and that's the difference between action and inaction. And in business and strategy is the difference between strategic planning and implementation. So it's like a light touch of small things that made me realize what my purpose was. And now I actively use it in my different fields.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. How did you identify that, your purpose is to connect, to tell stories?
I think it was a series of, it came from a series of non-related things just connecting, and the through line being educating and communicating and teaching. So, and I think about just the word influencer, that it's a label that has been thrown at me, and I suppose it's because it's the current, marketing trend, and but in that, I look at the fact that, and we'll come back to the term influencer, I look at the fact that I spent 4 years teaching, and I just never saw myself in that space. And then I look at, and I think I did pretty good at it. I was good. I enjoyed it until life, God said, on to the next. You have served your purpose here, or you have given your purpose enough here. Let's take it elsewhere. But I also look at my brand work, my digital content work. Most of it is in line with teaching, imparting knowledge, and it's across industries, the different industries that I work with, or the organizations from the various industries that I partner with. If you look at the medical aid company that I worked with, it was imparting knowledge around medical aid schemes, right, available to young professionals. And I'm also clear on who my audience is, and the type of content that I produce is at most times for them. And that is primarily young adults navigating work, career, navigating personal, so family, navigating now motherhood, and trying to retain self, develop self, and ultimately just live out your life's purpose. So the content that now I focus on and I enjoy making is around how do we bring convenience to our lives as young professionals? How do we live better? Live well, work smart, in our spaces. So even when you're talking about my partnerships with the asset management company that I worked with a couple of years ago, now it was about the fact that now I'm a mother and I want to learn, I want to understand where I can take my money. And I also understood, again, part of my brand ethos is simplifying complex services and products that are often deemed elitist, that the entrepreneur, anyone from the formal sector may not have easy access to or wouldn't know where to find. And yeah, that's I think part of my gift is accessing information and imparting knowledge with whoever gives me the audience, my community. Yeah.
By the way, I remember, some of the brands that you've worked with. I think you also worked with the medical aid. On the outside, it didn't seem so strategic. Like the first impression that I had was like, oh my goodness, so she's gonna make money with like every phase of her life. Like I was like wow.
That.
I was like
something
wow.
like that.
I'm like wow. I need to think about my life a little bit differently, So yeah, kudos to you to know that there's so much intentionality behind it and thought process. Gonna go for a quick break. When we come back, we now get into like the more deeper insight side of it. She's not just a creative. She's been an educator, but what are some of the lessons that she's learned in industry, both as I would call her an industry leader in the space, but also as someone who's dealt with students that were meant to become employable after they graduate. So stick around.
Have a business? Advertise with us. Reach us at info@theconvolounge.africa or +267 7651 9992. Convo Lounge. Expression, exposure, experience.
Welcome back to the second half of this conversation where we're talking to Marang Selolwane, talking all things the creative economy and its value chain. So yeah, let's jump into, the deeper insights of your experience. I find it interesting that you got into industry at a very young age. You can share the specific age, and you've evolved through the times. You're currently now specializing as a creative economy specialist. I think maybe tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing in terms of research, where you're focusing in your masters, and we'll talk about how you got there.
I started off on television at 11 and right now venturing into policy. I think in my 2 decades of being in the space, there have been many observations around just the ecosystem within the space, the creative sector, and the gaps. And I also understood that for me to be able to affect change and legitimize my skill would be to go the education route, which you know how third world countries, I'll leave it to third world countries, we generally really value education, right? And for you to be deemed a professional and a thought leader, you have to have the educational backup, right? And that's why I decided to now study my master's in cultural policy and management, in order to be able to focus on developing policy in Botswana, of course, across the continent and the world, but start at home because this is where I practice and this is where I recognize there's a need for rehabilitation of the sector. And there's so much work that I think needs to go into capacitating the sector, mapping the sector, valuing the sector, valuing the economic contribution of the sector to the country. How do we specialize now within the creative space? Because I think just because creativity in itself is subjective, it's also very hard to say someone is an expert. So those are some of the challenges that I'm investigating. But currently my paper is on television policy and intergovernmental relations between the various government organs that oversee the television sector. So my interest right now is in policy that governs television.
What was the problem statement for that?
I don't want to be spicy.
Okay. Okay.
So there is a policy gap.
Okay.
In the sector. So most of what we have now is a sector that's governed by multiple pieces of guidelines or frameworks or legislature. And you find that it's the outdated national policy on culture. You see, I don't want to be too technical, but
no. Keep going.
Basically,
please don't let my face confuse you.
We are being the sector is governed or regulated by multiple frameworks, right? That overlap and sometimes speak to different mandates, right? And then you have a sector that is, or television, state media that is managed from, initially it was 2 different ministries, right? So I'm interrogating the mechanisms that have been put in place to collaboratively manage those 2 stations. But funny enough, while I was writing this paper, Now TV was then removed from the DSTV bouquet, and now we have the multiple BTV channels. And I'm looking at the relationship between the Ministry for State President, Department of Broadcasting Services, and the Ministry of Youth. So
I can tell you're being very diplomatic. Let me provide some context.
Because, when you're doing your research, you don't want... I'm open. I'm open to seeing where the research will conclude or take me. I think as a researcher, you can't have... Try stay away from bias. Try remove yourself of bias.
Yeah.
Just so it's a balanced argument. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's an important piece of work that you're doing. I mean, I'm currently working at the Mass Media Complex, hosting the Morning Loop on RB2. And one of the things that I'm currently championing ideas is the need to privatize the mass media complex, right? I know you're speaking policy and all that, but let me just speak from like a grassroots level as somebody who's in the sector. And one of the reasons why I feel like it needs to be privatized is just the idea that the way that public sector functions is different from the way private sector functions. Private sector will be consistently interested in a return on investment, ROI,
rewarding excellence.
But if it's public sector, it's a public good, and so it's just more of disseminating information
and national identity.
And I think that, like you're saying, which is bringing me to my next point, we're going to have to define what we mean by
the creative economy,
but also the management of cultural assets. I think you said, what is that? My overall thought is that as Botswana, if the mass media complex was to be privatized, we could create jobs not just for ourselves as Botswana, but literally be the creative hub in Africa. Define that for us. What is it actually?
So the creative economy, there are a lot of buzzwords. I think as we're evolving and industries are also being innovated or evolving into other things, we come up with new areas altogether. And the thing with the creative sector, it's one such case where initially, it depends market to market, but generally speaking, the creative industries are, it's an industry of activities that are around, or at the core of them is creativity. It's talent, it's skill, it's any activity where wealth or income can be generated through intellectual property. So it's any activity that is protected by copyright, by trademarks, by patents. So that initially at the start of what we now know as the arts or the cultural and creative sectors, it was, the heritage activities, so the heritage sites, the museums, the theaters as a structure, and then you have traditional forms of art, the visual arts, performing arts, and now with digital technologies, we've now evolved into or now include advertising, architecture. So all those activities you would consider part of the creative industries. They're all rooted in cultural production. So now when it comes to the economic part of it, at some point, governments recognize that these activities are contributing to the economy. And you have sophisticated countries or sophisticated systems like the Hollywood system, the film industry in America, which long started valuing the contribution of, that sector to its economy. And then later on, you had the French joy, and you had, the British also make their own discoveries. And that's how we ultimately arrive at the creative economy. What is the economic justification of or contribution of the creative sector? And for us in Botswana, what we recognize as the CIs or creative industries, that includes all those, that would include heritage, like I already mentioned, the arts, so visual and performing arts, media, this is both traditional and digital media, and then you have the service-oriented activities, that's advertising, that's marketing. Okay, advertising is marketing, that's architecture, so there are different areas or industries within this economy that contribute financially to our GDP, which they do.
How do you manage your mind? I know it's a difficult question, but
how do you get there?
Yeah, let me tell you how I'm asking this question. You moved from being on television as a young person. Your role there is just to show up. I don't know if you had a script.
I did.
Right? Yeah, you had a script. And then you moved into the digital space as well. The order might not be sequential. You move into the digital space, and in here, you are an entrepreneur. You're also learning how to manage a team. You're also dealing with clients. You're like a content service provider. And then you also moved...
I love that, content service provider. Listen, you have to be good with your words.
And then you moved into teaching.
Yeah.
You tell us more about what you were actually teaching. The skill set, the mindset, moving from being an entrepreneur, service provider, or the talent in industry, you're not just instructing, right? But you're also having practical insights from industry. Now you're switching to policy, advisory, and again, it seems like it's far-fetched, but we can strongly tie it to where you started at 11, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like you're like a solution to many things here. In the academic world, we speak about the huge gap between theory and industry practice. And you were in a role where you were teaching with that prior experience. How do you manage your mind in terms of all these different roles that you're playing and for all of it to make sense somehow?
How do I manage my mind? Geez, it's such a difficult question to answer because even I don't know. Okay. And that's why I'm going to go back to our conversation on spirituality and doing certain things with ease. I think I enjoy what I do. So I enjoy taking in knowledge. I enjoy watching content. I enjoy speaking to Yandile. I enjoy people. And I get so much knowledge and wisdom from interacting with people, so much so that it excites me and invigorates me when it's time for me to do the many things that I do. So if it's teaching, I look forward to, being with my learners. And I've always said, I want a space where there's collaborative learning. I'm learning as I'm teaching, you're teaching as you're learning. And I think that's just been my approach with everything that I do in these different facets. But it's really also come from the fact that for some reason, I'm a long game girl. I'm a long game girl. I'm a legacy girl. That much I know about myself. I'm willing to put in the hours to study. I'm willing to put in the hours to figure things out. I'm willing to call Yandile and say, Yandile, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need your help, you know, whether it's on a personal level, professional level. And it's really helped me manage my mind, because then some things I don't have to struggle with, because I know we were speaking about having a board of directors. I have a board of directors in my life who I run all my ideas through, you know, whether it's content, whether it's my policy work, whether it's tsatsi. I have someone who has information, who I know will help me figure this thing out, whatever it is I'm grappling with in that moment. So I think I manage my mind because I have people who help me manage it. Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Let's close it with this. Let's talk about the creative economy. I think we've touched a bit on value chain, but feel free to touch on that. And more broadly, it's ecosystem, Botswana. Your general thoughts on this? What's missing? What do we need to work on?
I think my observation with the creative sector is the inability to professionalize the sector or to recognize it as an income generating economic economy contributing sector. And I think it's because majority of the sector, and this is not unique to Botswana, it's actually, you know, across the continent, majority of the sector sits within the informal. And informal sector, of course, is unregulated, untaxed, therefore very difficult to measure. So when it comes down to now, okay, so where's the data to support why private sector needs to come in or chip in or invest in the sector? It's very difficult to show, to present. Same thing with government. You know, we don't have the best research data collection systems in Botswana. And in doing my research, I realized, again, like I said earlier, policies are outdated. So no one knows what to do from where and who needs help. Just simple mapping studies. If we're talking about the contribution of the various key players, so that's the ministries, that's the actual cultural or creative producers, that's private sector, you know, what role do they have individually? And I look at, for example, the private sector, maybe if we could have tax incentives to encourage them to invest in the sector, that would be great. You have different examples across the continent where governments, I mean, there's VANZA, which is the visual arts network in South Africa, that's collaborating with the British Council as well to have access to, and the EU actually, to have access to the EU market. So that's trade access, you know, and promoting dialogue between South Africa. These are just examples, South Africa and the EU, right? You have one of the leading banks in Nigeria that are leading mapping studies in collaboration with the British Council in order to determine who the players are in the sector and their needs and challenges and what the solutions needed for them are. So these are some of the examples we can use. Botswana, you know, simple examples like that. There's so much information on what needs to be done. I said earlier, just a simple mapping study. Yarona, who does what where? The musicians, the visual artists, the advertising space. How many people are they employing? You know, such the statistics. Quite a lot of the data is outdated. I remember reading recently that in 2020, 24,000 jobs were created by the sector, most of which were welders and carpenters, who we do consider part of the sector, followed by tailors and dressmakers, then advertising and marketing.
That just twisted my mind.
So that's just something to throw in. I think in 2018, Bitbug also carried out research on the study of what they call copyright-based industries and their contribution to the GDP. In 2018, it was sitting at that was for 2016, was sitting at 5.46%. That's the sector. which was more than what agriculture brought in, which was slightly lower than that. So when you have such information, but that was 2016, right? That was pre-COVID. Where's the data for now and what's happening right now? But I mean, I look forward to seeing what the National Arts Council will do. They knew. They are right now. They're developing strategic partnerships. I see with other markets or other creative economy spaces and organizations in other parts of the world. So I look forward to seeing what those exchanges will bring for us here. And it is important that we not mimic Global South, because I think the African market has its nuances. It would be lovely to see banks come in and support the industry through, I don't know, just like financing models that speak to the nuances of the sector, you know? So yeah, that's my take on the challenges that I see and examples of other African markets that are collectively coming into to bring vibrancy to their spaces.
I think we're on the right track. I know the National Arts Council of Botswana has released opened a call for applications for creatives, whether they want to host festivals or capacity building initiatives. But I think I also saw an element of research. So I think in this case, it's also just an element of self-agency from the individuals in industry themselves, who's going to stand up and champion the idea of researching to identify
but
all
even
those,
speaking on that, as a creative ourselves, and I always say this, I speak to my musician friends, I speak to my friends in acting or whatever, and I always say, guys, you have to educate yourself on the business. Like, you have to treat yourself as a business. That's why I said earlier, I don't want to use the word brand. I want to use business, Marang. You have to start, you have to implement systems around you or develop systems around you that allow you to perfect the actual craft while commercializing from the craft in a way that the mining sector would do or, the agriculture sector would do. Because we understand that in terms of the process of the development of creative product, you first start with the creation or ideation. I gave this example earlier, creation or ideation, and then you move on to the actual production of the product or service, and then dissemination, and then eventually consumer, right? We need to understand the services around there, and that's where value chain comes in. Marang, and I'll give a practical example of myself. Marang, Organization X comes to me. I need one for content. I need a dressmaker, right? I need a makeup artist. I need a videographer. And these are people that I employ, right? Because this is a business. The same way laptops have different people, making them, producing them, manufacturing them. Yeah, the different components of building this business that is Marang. Same thing, musicians need to apply the same principles, and then eventually dissemination. What does dissemination look like? It looks like having a marketing strategist or strategy if you can't afford, someone specifically in marketing. The legalities, you need to have an accountant. So I think as artists, it's imperative now more than ever to be able to see ourselves as businesses so that eventually we also can justify why we need the support that we need from a documentation point. This is what I come with, this is my value, and here are the stats and here are the numbers.
Marang, thank you so much for joining us. We're definitely going to have episode part 2 of this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Think of yourself as a business. I think that's the quote that I'm getting for the creatives as in the space or in industry. Thank you so much for joining us on the second episode of the Convo Lounge podcast.
This is the Convo Lounge. Expression, exposure, experience.